Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the second seminar in our series. My name is Len Cruz. Dr. Buser, who you're most accustomed to, wasn't available today, so I'll be standing in on his behalf. This is the second in the series. There's a 5-webinar series, and they all involve Erich Neumann, his life and work, and his relationship with C.G. Jung. For those who aren't aware, the first in this series, an introduction to Erich Neumann, is available for free, and if you wish to go to our website at the Asheville Jung Center, you can download that and still watch it. Today's presentation is being conducted by Nancy Swift Furlotti. Dr. Furlotti's topic is Neumann and Jung as painters. Murray Stein, who most of you are all familiar with, will be a co-presenter, and Ryan Deegan is in the background as our technician. The webinar today is expected to last about 90 to 120 minutes, and remember that you're able to ask questions from any computer using the chat feature, and I encourage you to explore that. If you wish, you can also email questions to us, and the email address is there if you want to record it now, ashevilleyoung@gmail.com, and then we'll try and read some of those questions at the end of the presentation. Keep in mind, though, if you do open up the chat menu, it's possible to ask questions through your own audio system. Today, the attendees that we have at this live conference, and some of the ones who will be visiting when it's rebroadcast online, arise from Canada, Sweden, Switzerland, Denmark, Brazil, Israel, the UK, Japan, and Australia. Let me just go over a few technical details before we begin. Make sure that you've clicked in the correct audio choice in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. You'll see two choices there, as you see listed, the mic and speaker and the telephone. Most of the attendees are likely to use the microphone and speaker, but you're free to dial in if you wish using the telephone, and then a number will pop up in the dialog box. At the beginning of the conference and until you've raised your hand and you're called upon, the microphone should be muted on your system, so that will be done initially. We really do encourage you to explore the features of the webinar's platform. You'll want to be in full screen mode, and that will allow you to see the slides the way I'm presenting them and the way that Nancy will be presenting them. It allows you to also enlarge the image. You can do that as well with other features on there, including a slider that's on the screen. One word of caution, we are going to be recording this webinar as always, and if you wish to remain anonymous, please keep that in mind, and you may wish to either submit your questions through email, but if we do call upon you, that anonymity will be gone. Just a bit of a notice about the upcoming webinar. Our next webinar will be Thursday, March 23rd, also at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and the topic there will be Neumann, Religion, and the Humanists, and it will be featuring Tamara Krohn and Ann Lammers. Today's presenter, Nancy Swift Furlotti, has served in so many capacities and advanced the study of Jung. She's been the co-chair of the C.G. Jung Professional Endowment in Analytical Psychology at UCLA. She's a former president of the Los Angeles Jung Institute. She's a former co-president of the Philemon Foundation, a board member at Pacifica Graduate Institute, and a tremendous supporter of the work of Erich Neumann, and perhaps a substantial part of the rediscovery of Neumann's contributions to analytical psychology. I'm going to allow Murray to do a little bit of an introduction. Most of you know Murray very well. He's a supervising and training analyst and former president of ISAP Zurich. He's also the co-editor of Turbulent Times, Creative Minds, which is a compilation of essays written by some of the presenters at the conference that took place in Tel Aviv at the launch of the Jung-Neumann letters. Murray currently resides in Switzerland. Murray, if you wouldn't mind taking over from here.
Thanks, Lynn. Glad to, and it's a great delight for me that Nancy is going to make this presentation today. I just want to say a couple of words about Nancy's role generally in this recent renaissance of interest in Neumann's work. Neumann was probably Jung's most brilliant student of his generation, and but died at an early age, unfortunately, and his work continued to be read and used to some extent in analytical psychology, but over the years it faded, and much about Neumann's life and contribution weren't actually known about until fairly recently. And the reason he's now coming into full sight so much more than he was, is that the letters, the correspondence between Jung and Neumann that they exchanged between 1933 and 1960 were published a couple of years ago, and the book was launched at a conference in Tel Aviv. And this publication of Neumann's letters, I would say, was energetically driven by Nancy. Everybody knew there was a wealth of correspondence, but we had seen very little of it. A few letters had been published, a few letters had been commented on by Neumann's son Misha and so on, but the full extent and range of their correspondence was not known. And it took years and years of very hard work and I must say remarkable fortitude, determination to bring those letters to publication. And Nancy and Erich Shalit were really the driving force behind that. And since then, and since that conference, a number of papers have been written about Neumann. Some of his previously unpublished work has been published, and more of it is on its way. And so we're getting a much fuller picture of who Neumann was and what he contributed to analytical psychology, much of which has not really been studied in detail and is now being taken on board. Now, one of the features of Neumann has to do with his personal life and his own inner development, has to do with his pictures and his active imagination and so on. And this was totally unknown to the public until very recently. And so today we have the privilege and the honor of hearing from Nancy, who has studied this material now extensively, to show us some of the pictures and describe some of the themes that Neumann was working on, and comparing that to Jung's work, who was also a painter, as we know from the Red Book. This comparison between Neumann's path of individuation as represented in pictures and Jung's. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you, Nancy, and after your presentation we'll have a chance to discuss, and perhaps the audience will have some questions and comments as well. So please take the microphone, Nancy.
Okay, thank you very much, Murray. And welcome, everybody. This is going to be an exciting evening. I'm going to run through an introduction first, and then we'll get to the paintings, which really are quite exceptional. Most people have seen Jung's, but not many have seen Erich Neumann's. So I'll start by talking a little bit about Jung. C.G. Jung was exceptionally interested in images from the beginning of his life. Jung's earliest dream was from between 3 or 4 years old and is quite interesting in light of his inner journey documented in the Red Book. Early dreams can be prognostic and show the struggles the child will face. It's interesting to think about this dream in light of the future images Jung painted and the archetypes that captivated him. So in the dream, He says, I was in this meadow near the vicarage. Suddenly I discovered a dark, rectangular, stone-lined hole in the ground. I had never seen it before. I ran forward curiously and peered down into it. Then I saw a stone stairway leading down. Hesitantly and fearfully, I descended. At the bottom was a doorway with a round arch, closed off by a green curtain. It was a big, heavy curtain of worked stuff like brocade, and it looked very sumptuous. I was curious to see what might be hidden behind. I pushed it aside. I saw before me in the dim light a rectangular chamber about 30 feet long. The ceiling was arched and of hewn stone. The floor was laid with flagstones, and in the center a red carpet ran from the entrance to a low platform. On the platform stood a wonderfully rich golden throne. I'm not certain, but perhaps a red cushion lay on the seat. It was a magnificent throne, a real king's throne in a fairy tale. Something was standing on it, which I thought at first was a tree trunk, 12 to 15 feet high and about 1.5 to 2 feet thick. It was a huge thing, reaching almost to the ceiling, but it was of a curious composition. It was made of skin and naked flesh, and on top there was something like a rounded head with no face and no hair. On the very top of the head was a single eye gazing motionlessly upward. It was fairly light in the room, although there were no windows and no apparent sources of light. Above the head, however, was an aura of brightness. The thing did not move, yet I had the feeling that it might at any moment crawl off the throne like a worm and creep toward me. I was paralyzed with terror. At that moment, I heard from outside and above my mother's voice. She called out, "Yes, just look at him. That's the man-eater." That intensified my terror still more, and I awoke sweating and scared to death. Jung discusses this dream in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. The tree trunk was actually a huge ritual phallus. One could say that this was an archaic image of the Godhead enthroned deep within Jung's psyche, inviting him down into the inner sanctum, into the secrets of the earth to glimpse what will be his life's work, understanding the psyche and the archetypes of wholeness, the self. The phallus was non-human, underworldly, and required sacrifice, being a man-eater. The question he asked himself later in his life was, who spoke to me? Who talked of problems far beyond my knowledge? Who brought the above and below together and laid the foundation for everything that was to fill the second half of my life with the stormiest passion? Who but that alien guest who came both from above and from below? It was an initiation into the realm of darkness. And indeed, Jung's paintings are of a collective, mythic nature focused on the archetypal level of the unconscious. There are only a few initial images in the Red Book that depict him. These are in Liber Primus on the folio pages. As he moves on to Liber Secundus, the images become archetypal and symbolic in nature. One can witness Jung's descent into the depths of the unconscious through his personal unconscious layer to the transformation of the God image within himself and for the collective. He is fascinated with this deeper layer where the symbols themselves transform in the psyche beyond the influence of the ego. This early dream terrifies him. And indeed it should. He's confronted with the dark side of the God image, one he will wrestle with his whole life and finally explain in answer to Job. His fascination with image continued throughout his life, through his dreams and his paintings and carvings. By the time he decided to create a large red book to contain and document his inner journey, he was quite accomplished at painting. While in Paris meeting with Pierre Janet, he also spent time in the Louvre copying paintings, the foundational experience for many fine artists. Although he had tremendous talent, he adamantly refused to categorize his paintings and sculptures as art, but instead thought of them as part of his psychological process. He was a psychologist, psychiatrist first and foremost, believing that by focusing on the artistic quality of the images, he would remove himself from the essence of their meaning. Instead, as a way of extracting more meaning from the dream images or visions, he devised a process called active imagination, which enabled him to move deeper into the archetypal essence and meaning of the images. And I quote, Jung considered his method of active imagination to be a spontaneous amplification of archetypal material. In active imagination, the person assumes an attitude of passive consciousness, enabling openness to conscious influences. In this process, one interacts with the figures from the dreams or visions through a written dialogue, or paintings, or sculptures, or movement. The Red Book contains both written dialogue and paintings as active imaginations. The whole book is really an active imagination. As he began to use art expression as a means of pinning down images from the unconscious, creating a living relationship to the many inner figures, he included those around him, his patients, colleagues, and friends in the discussion of this new process. Through the verbal and visual expression of his inner world and its pressing inner images, he was able to remain sane during a very deep depression. On his inner journey through his own experience, he took on the task of studying the nature of the psyche firsthand. From his dreams, active imaginations, and paintings, he followed his red thread that eventually wound into a cohesive understanding of human nature inside and out. These early experiences gave him the prima materia, which he digested and clarified throughout the rest of his life. It's interesting that as an accomplished artist, Jung was able to use this medium to express his inner world. Frequently in analysis, one sees that active imagination is more successful when expressed through an unfamiliar medium. For example, the artist might write, or the writer might paint or sculpt. Either one might dance or use movement. The constraints of an accomplished form of expression might be too great to allow the spontaneity of the unconscious figures and images to emerge. In Jung's case, as an intuitive thinking type, it seems he was working through his sensation function on the Red Book, calligraphy, and paintings. His writing is much more infused with feeling as he moved away from his thinking. Neumann, a young disciple of Jung's, picked up the method of active imagination as a way of bringing the images of the unconscious into reality so they could be better understood and brought into active relationship with him. This important process increases consciousness, which of course is the goal of the individuation process. After working with Jung for 6 months in 1934, Neumann took up residence in Israel with his family. He took with him a huge gift in the form of this new means of engaging the psyche through word and image. As we will see, he did not have the skill of a trained artist, but because of that was actually freer to express himself with less precision, allowing his emotion to come through strongly. It seems that Neumann was more engaged with his personal unconscious, while Jung was drawn to the archetypal realm. While both men had to explore all aspects of themselves, we know from reading Jung's early childhood dream, it was his fate or life's work to descend into the realm of the objective psyche to make sense of it for himself and for all of us. Fate befell Neumann in a different way. Neumann had a completely different life experience. As an early Zionist fascinated with the new roots growing in Palestine, he decided to leave his country of origin and immigrate, all the while keenly aware of the dangers in the rise of National Socialism. He watched the horrendous atrocities befalling family members and friends, an attempt to eradicate an entire race. He was faced with pure evil and survived. At the same time, in his new home, a very young Israel, he was surrounded by a different war and danger, and the survival of his young country. It was difficult to find a safe place in the world, not just ontological danger, but very real danger was everywhere. This was his prima materia, out of which came his book, Depth Psychology and a New Ethic, that expressed his struggle with and understanding of evil. His focus was on his race, the Jews, who they were, why this should happen to them, and how to heal from this set him on his life's course. We don't have a childhood dream from Erich Neumann to compare how his young psyche was preparing for his unique life. There are holes in our understanding of his history, both real and psychological, that need filling in, but we can glean the overall pattern of interests and what he struggled with from his writings and paintings. In Neumann's letters to Jung, we have a record of his stunning vision of an ape man with a single eye representing evil, with whom Neumann struggles and finally realizes that he carries the evil within himself. He had this when he was pondering the material for depth psychology and the new ethic and the issue of evil. In the vision, he says, I seem to be commissioned to kill the ape man in the profound primal hole. As I approached him, he was hanging by night, sleeping on the cross above the abyss, but his crooked single eye was staring into the depths of this abyss. While it at first seemed that I was supposed to blind him, I all of a sudden grasped his innocence, his dependence on the single eye of the Godhead, which was experiencing the depths through him, which was a human eye. Then very abridged, he says, I sank down opposite this single eye, jumped into the abyss, but was caught by the Godhead, which carried me on the wings of his heart. After that, this single eye opposite the ape man closed, and it opened on my forehead. And then he says, he writes to Jung, bit difficult to write this, but what should one do? Neumann was very interested in art and literature and the relationship between the artist and his culture. He wrote a number of articles on the subject, including Art and Time, The Creative Man and Transformation, Leonardo da Vinci and the Mother Archetype, Marc Chagall and the Bible, and quite a number of papers on Kafka, with whom he was fascinated from an early age on. He also wrote 2 illustrated children's stories for his 2 children, one on the topic of the Bible for his son, and the other on the moon for his daughter. This allows us to glimpse a bit of his playful fantasy side. Jung painted in gouache, while Neumann chose watercolor. These are 2 very different mediums. The former is solid and opaque, and it can be layered on thickly to cover completely. The other is water-based and thin. The tint can be thinned with water to be more transparent or remain thicker to create more intense color. Once you lay it on the paper, you're stuck with it. There's no way to rework watercolor. It's a tough and unforgiving medium. As we will see, Neumann's paintings don't need to be forgiven. They are bright, fresh, free, and mistakes remain. Neumann uses bright primary colors, which many times seem unmixed, while Jung clearly mixes his colors, and there are great variations color-wise, including value or dark and light. In a number of paintings, he uses up to 10 different colors. Jung uses perspective in some of his paintings, while Neumann does less so, leaving his paintings simple and flat. We do know that Jung bought the finest paints available at the time. Jung was meticulous. He sketched his drawings before painting them and drew them in pencil on his pages in the Red Book before completing them with gouache. They are detailed, well thought out, and well executed. It appears that he's using a different function than Neumann. Jung is enlisting his sensation function in the painting's execution, while Neumann seems to give free rein to his emotion. Neumann, too, outlined in pencil what he would then paint. We do know that Neumann named many of his paintings in small frames on the relevant page in his journal, like The Birth, The Red Woman, and we'll see these in just a bit. Just like Jung, Neumann named prominent figures that appeared over and over: Ashmedai, the Earth Spirit, the Great Jew, Uranus, and others. Jung painted a total of 129 small and large images in the Red Book. 55 are small embellished letters, while 74 are half or full page paintings. There are 2 long series, Incantations, which is 12 pages long, and a series of mandalas, 18 pages long. Jung used different motifs over and over, for example, images from nature, flowers, vines, insects, and animals. There are many paintings that contain mosaics or background or masks. He used what is called runes frequently as a background, along with multicolored arabesques. We have copies of 85 watercolors painted by Neumann. There may be more, but this is unfortunately, more than this, but unfortunately, a large portion of Neumann's writings and all of his active imagine paintings were sold at auction in 2006. I've also been trying to find the buyer of all of that information without tremendous success. I have leads, but not tremendous success. There are 30 paintings containing women in Neumann's collection, whereas in Jung's Red Book, there are only 3. This is a dramatic difference considering that both worked on their relationship to the anima, their inner opposite, the feminine. Neumann has 14 paintings that contain snakes, while Jung has 5, although his written active imagination is full of conversations with his snake soul. Both men paint mosaic masks and mandalas that are quite similar. Neumann seems to have a wider range of animals in his paintings: elephants, bulls, dogs, alligators, turtles, lions, and birds. Jung has many insects, and of course his soul in the form of a snake and a dove. Jung has more imaginary figures like the death worm, cosmic dragon, Ammonius, Isdubar, Atmaviktu, Phanes, and Philemon. Enough talking. Now let's take a look at some of these images. Ryan, this is number 1. I'm going to give you a very brief introduction here. I just wanted to mention that one thing that is so striking about both of the dreams that I mentioned is that each one of them has that single eye. So think about that as we go along, looking at these images. These were both very important dreams to both of these men, and they, at completely different times in life, each one of them dreamt of that single eye. Neumann's paintings have been a bit of an enigma until very recently we have not known anything about them other than that they were painted between mid-May 1936 and 1939. Neumann was 31 when he began the series. Some paintings are dated, but most are not. Neumann was not good about dating papers, and that has caused great difficulty determining not only the sequence of his paintings, but certain iterations of his papers as well. He kept journals during this period, including his dreams, active imaginations, and references to his paintings. At the top of some of his journal pages, in a small box, he sketched a small similarity to the painting the page referenced. Some of these paintings were named, but many were not. The absence of specific information makes this work of understanding these paintings like putting together a large puzzle. Thankfully, the Neumann family photographed them, so at least we have copies. The journals were not sold, and Erich Neumann's daughter, Raleigh Lowenthal Neumann, and Jungian analyst Tamar Krohn are in the process of reading through them to determine the sequence of the paintings. And I have to thank them very much for doing that. I know it's a tedious job. Studying dream and painting series helps us see the psyche's transformational process at work. With the following paintings, I will give you a general archetypal amplification of the images. Okay, now we can step in. Ryan, there we go. This first painting is titled The Earth Spirit Next to the Fire. The Earth Spirit appears more often than other figures. We do know that Neumann was very interested in the Earth Spirit and the tension between Yahweh and Earth. And around that time, he wrote a really fabulous article which appears in The Fear of the Feminine, which is one of my most favorite compilations, and it's called The Meaning of the Earth Archetype for Modern Times. He wrote this in 1953, but he was thinking about it much earlier than that, working on it around the time of these paintings. The earth spirit is the figure standing next to the fire holding what seems like flames in both hands, which would suggest that the central face with the black and brown hair is a self-image emerging from the central flames. The earth figure seems to be standing just outside of a cave with an animal like a deer. There are three distinct areas, black, blue, and green. Perhaps the unconscious, the watery realm, and the green vegetative world. All three are unified by the fire. We will see these figures again and maybe have some further clarification of who they are. This next painting is of the great Jew. He and Ashmedai are fighting. Ashmedai is the king of demons, also called Asmodeus, known from the Deuterocanonical book of Tobit and from the Babylonian Talmud. He is described as a monstrous creature with black wings and was instrumental to Solomon in the building of the first temple in Jerusalem. This one is called The Earth Spirit is Bleeding. This is the same figure in the first slide. Again, he holds what looks like fire in his left hand. He is wounded with blood dripping into a bowl while insects drink the blood or are perhaps trying to heal him. The insects look like bees, which symbolically are connected to many gods and various myths, including Hindu, Greek, and biblical. Their honey is a healing tincture, as well as a source of divine wisdom. They are connected to pollination, fertility, and the centrality of the matriarch. In Hebrew, the word bee is Devorah, or Deborah, who was a prophetess, the only female judge mentioned in the Bible. This painting is called The Double Egg. The journal says Ashmedai is transformed into Uranus. We see the egg containing two faces, one brown and the other gray, whereas before, the one face contained both sides. A differentiation is taking place in the egg, a container much like an alchemical container being heated by the flame below it. To the right is the great Jew, while on the left is Ashmedai, who is said to have black wings. Now Uranus with purple wings and a ladder up to the upper world. We see the three colors, black, blue, and green again, with the fire in the middle, acting as a connection between all three. For the first time, we have a feminine figure and an elephant on the right, the red side, and perhaps the earth spirit or the hero on the left with a snake above him. Uranus was the primal Greek god symbolizing the sky. He gave birth to the 12 Titans, 3 Cyclops, and 3 hundred-handed ones. His son Kronos castrated him and became the new ruler of the universe. Astrologically, he represents originality, renewal, revolution, and eccentricity. Bleeding earth spirit, Prometheus and the witch. That's what this is called. Prometheus is the small figure on the mountain in the middle, climbing up to steal fire. The fire is needed to bring the life energy from the gods to the human realm. We always have to encounter the witch first, that shadow aspect of the great feminine. Here she seems to take the fire for cooking. Fire represents the beginning of human civilization. This is called 3 stairs. Here again is Uranus, changed from Ashmedai, the transformer who moves from one realm to another, up and down the ladder as angel, demon, trickster. He brings fire in one hand and what looks like a snake in the other. I just have to say these paintings are just so interesting, and I'm sorry you don't have more time to actually study them. This is called the world wheel. Something is growing, emerging from the center of the human figure that stands within the world wheel. So you can begin to sense how the images are changing and transforming as they progress along through this series. This is called Uranus Spreads Himself Out. The whole scene seems to be in an egg. Again, we have those 2 faces, blonde and gray, now separate, with Uranus in between standing on something like an egg that is incubating the red one, a feminine figure. Fire, water, earth, and something white flows into her as she lays between the earth forces and the fire from the gods. The fire is now in the earthly realm, perhaps here used as an offering to the spirit realm. She's called the red. She emerged out of the prior egg and is clearly something like the feminine embodiment of the earth. These 2 other figures appear in other paintings, so they have some specific, presently unknown representation and connection to the earthly realm. In the letters, Neumann writes in 1934 about the first appearance of his anima, and he writes, "As you prophesied, the anima has gone to ground. She made an appearance all nice and brown, strikingly Africa, even more impenetrable in me, domineering, with a sisterly relationship to many animals, a boa constrictor, a panther, an elephant, a wild horse, and a rhinoceros." Thus speaks an image. This is called the blessing. The red one is being blessed from above and from below through the snake. There is a flow of energy reaching now all 3 realms. This is called the blossoming earth spirit. And we can see here that life is now growing. This is the rising earth spirit. Something is in the transformation process, incubating symbolically out of the stars in the center, as if a mandala is forming, releasing its life energy. And so it's not so surprising that this next one is the pregnant woman. This is the next natural step in this individuation process. First, the trickster steals fire from the gods, then the spark is transferred to the world. Nature herself is born and fertilized out of the potent symbol and union of above and below. It lands within the womb of the human as she seems to stand between the grayish spirit, perhaps the union of the black-haired and brown, blonde-haired faces, and the demon himself, who has a mosaic face that looks like he has horns. The woman now holds the fire, perhaps the same life energy that was released from the mandala in the last painting. As is true for all humans, we stand between the opposing realms of nature and spirit. We are the ones who have to navigate that middle ground. Birth. Here we now have the birth of the child, protected by the opposing forces, the symbol of new life. Each spirit seems to bring a gift, grapes and a flame. And of course, one quick thing, what we know about that devil figure from the underworld, he's also Mercurius, which is a very important transformative spirit energy. So within that figure we have the opposing sides from the unconscious. This is called the diamond flower inside the wheel. Now the process moves to the symbolic realm and is a symbol of the self in this beautiful naturalistic mandala. From the earth emerges the mandala. This might reflect Neumann's preoccupation with the earth, the soil itself, and the Jews finding their deep roots in nature. The one who sits on the throne is what this one is called. The child has been enthroned on what appears to be a primordial earthly realm filled with trees, animals, water, earth, and the passionate bright yellow sun-filled sky. The child's arms are lifted in celebration or gratitude for the birth of this realm. The snake encircles the divine child's container. The red cow at the bottom of the mountain appears in other paintings. As much of a story as it is, we are invited into Neumann's myth, a small but significant part of his individuation process. One wants to rest here a while, but that's not possible for very long. And what we know about moving from one opposite to another in antiodromia, here we are, the pain of the world. The reality of the shadow side is ever present, and we cannot forget it. We should not forget it. The year is 1938. This painting was painted on March 12th. 8 months later, the nightmare of Kristall Night befell Germany and the Jews as a reminder of the very real existence of evil. From Israel, Neumann knew what was taking place in Germany. The three figures and animals seemed stuck in the blackness of the unconscious, as if nature and consciousness were being repressed downward in an untenable cave. A fire not connected to the surface is locked away with them. The Jewish souls go up in flames. The wild strokes of blue emanate from the black pyramid along with the red lightning and flames from above. Could this be the evil side of the self? The green of nature is suppressed. It strikes me that crazy, intuitive thinking represented by the color blue has been unleashed along with destructive passion and emotion in red. A dangerous combination. And the last painting I'm going to show is called The World Hour. This is the last of the series, as far as we know. This was painted on between April 18th and April 28th of the same year. Thankfully, and true to form, the psyche compensates for the horror of the prior painting. The process cycles up and down from one side to the other, positive to negative, just as the ocean tides come in and go out in a never-ending cycle. We shift to the archetypal realm with this painting, far away from the reality of evil in the world. Here we find hope and balance in the three realms, but we cannot forget the presence of the snake in the red and black encasement at the bottom of the scene. Evil exists, and Neumann never forgot that. His life work was to make sense of evil and understand consciousness. The mosaic-faced demon is not really a devil, but more a nature spirit, as I referred to earlier. There are opposites, but not really conflict. What seems of importance is finding balance. The truth that emerges is that the only horror is man-made. Now we're going to be moving on to Jung's paintings. I'm sure most of you have seen quite a number of his paintings. And I will try to do justice looking at a piece of his process of active imagination now. And of course, we're all much more familiar with Jung's paintings and writings in the Red Book. The book is presented in three parts. The first part is called Liber Primus, which consists of folio pages that are actually loose sheets of paper. Jung began his project using individual sheets of paper, but when the paint began to flake off the surface, he switched to a special bound red leather book he had made for himself. He then slipped the individual pages into the Red Book, or Liber Novus, then continued with Liber Secundus, where he copied his pre-worked fantasies, expressed his visions, dreams, active imaginations, and paintings onto the bound pages. The first part contains only small paintings and historiated initials that begin each section. In Liber Primus, Jung begins with more personal paintings, including images of himself. But in Liber Secundus, he shifts to the archetypal symbolic realm, descending deeper and deeper as his transformation unfolds. His work on the Red Book continued from 1913 to 1930. This is the very first page of the folios. It's the historiated D. And it's quite hard to see exactly what's going on in this D. I'm talking about the painting itself, not the script around it. But if you look very closely, you'll see that this lays out the journey Jung was embarking on. We see the three levels of the cosmos, from the underworld, beneath the ocean, the civilized world, mountains, and sky. The snake rises up out of the fire, crowned as Mercurius the Transformer, the beginning and end of the process of individuation. In the sky, Jung lays out the cosmos in astrological signs, beginning with Cancer and moving backwards through the signs of the zodiac to a cross in the sky, and on the right side is the sign of Aquarius. We know much later he discussed the importance in the shift from the ion of Pisces to Aquarius, from the age where we are contained within organized religions to the new age where we are our own container for the waters of the unconscious and the transformation of the God image. This is in fact what Jung demonstrates in the Red Book, that same process working directly through him. In Liber Primus, Jung is confronted with the spirit of the depths that leads him away from the spirit of the times, down into the unconscious to encounter his soul. The wealth of the soul exists in images, says Jung. His journey is all about finding and developing a relationship to his soul. This painting refers to Jung killing Siegfried. This is also one of the early folio paintings in Liber Primus. This painting reflects Jung's myth as the hero, yet it was his heroic attitude that had to die before he could descend deeper into his feelings to find his soul. I quote Jung, "Everything that becomes too old becomes evil. If the God ceases to be the way of life, he must fall." End of quote. Jung had to kill everything in himself that was arrogant, prideful, and worn out, like his ambition, opening the way for the birth of the renewed God image and the new attitude towards life. Now we have Jung, Elijah, Salome, and the snake. Now the wise elder appears with a beautiful blind maiden. Jung wants nothing to do with her, as she is the seductress murderer of John the Baptist. To him, she represents pleasure and danger. Jung is caught between the emotions of hating, rejection, and desire. He describes this as forethinking versus pleasure. The snake sits between these opposites as the third principle, which at times is black and at other times is white, but always brings what we need. To encounter this new God, Jung realizes he must go into the depths, into the dark chaos, as it is an inner happening. From there, the divine child born with a black snake in one hand and a white snake in the other. His willingness to self-sacrifice allows Salome to gain her sight, and Jung learns to appreciate joy in the process. And this is the end of Liber Primus. This is called the death worm on the sun. In Liber Secundus, Jung is deep in the unconscious, and what emerges is this creature surrounded by an archaic writing in symbols with what look like tiles, perhaps the beginning of the mosaics he later paints. Jung begins his struggle with the shadow. The worm is the lowly creature that fertilizes the soil. Here it is the worm that sits on the sun in the underworld, waiting for it to be redeemed. It represents the shadow, the evil that is part of the prima materia for the transformation of the God image. In 1940, Jung wrote, and I quote, "Evil is relative, partly avoidable, partly fate. The same goes for virtue, and one often doesn't know which is worse," end of quote. Now we come upon Izdubar. This is Jung's God, the dying God in need of transformation. Jung travels from the underworld with the death worm to meet this giant. Yet this god is mortal and becomes mortally wounded by Jung's descriptions of his world, reflecting how the emphasis on science has taken away the capacity for belief. The story continues with Jung saving Izdubar. He realizes he must save his god, though he does not know how he could possibly be able to move him. Out of desperation, Jung finally realizes that he can use his own imagination to make Izdubar as small as an egg, and that way carry his god to safety in his pocket. This is a wonderfully fanciful and important sequence in the Red Book. If you haven't read it, you really should. This is called Arthava Veda 4.1.4. This is Jung's first mandala that he paints in the Red Book. The title under this painting refers to a Vedic charm to promote fertility as a means to heal Izdubar, the bull god who incubates in the egg, the container that will allow for the transformation into the new God image, the new symbol of the self. This mandala painting reflects the beginning of this process. It's the first of Jung's mandalas. This is also the first time runes are included in a painting. Jung had a dream of hieroglyphics or phylogenetic engrams of a historical symbolic nature that he painted as runes, and they acted as a private language for him. This is the solar barge. This motif is the Egyptian sun's struggle at the end of each day to traverse through the underworld safely and be reborn into the new day. The danger is seen in the evil snake or monster called Apophis that strives to consume the sun and stop its course. The horns of Isis are seen on the barge holding the golden sun. The great goddess protects the sun on its journey. Jung referred to this as, I quote, "The battle with a sea monster represented an attempt to free ego consciousness from the grip of the unconscious," end of quote. And along with that quote, of course, we know that an increase in consciousness is always a great loss for the unconscious. So there's always a battle that has to ensue. This is called Katapatha Brahmanam. In the Vedas, this refers to a ritual fire healing performed at sunrise and sunset. For Jung, this painting refers to the opening of the egg in which Izdubar was incubating and transforming. The solar god is born as Izdubar steps out of the egg, like the solar barge reaching the new day, the sun rising in the sky. As the new god rises into the sky, Jung descends deeper into the underworld and reminds us that, I quote, "all the dragons and monstrous serpents of eternal emptiness follow behind the divine sun. The god suffers when man does not accept his darkness. Thus we probably have to accept evil without love and hate, recognizing that it exists and must have its share in life. In so doing, we can deprive it of the power it has to overwhelm us." End of quote. This is a beautiful mandala This painting was the culmination of a sequence of 19 images focusing on the movement of psychic energy in and out of pre-mandala forms. Jung said of this painting that it was an at first unconscious attempt to restore order in the emotional state he was in when he had been caused by an invasion of unconscious contents. Well, I think I said that wrong. Let me read it again. It was an at first unconscious attempt to restore order in the emotional state he was in, which had been caused by an invasion of unconscious contents. And that's clearly what he was experiencing throughout the Red Book. Is-Dubar rose upward into the sky. Jung fell down into the underworld and had to face the shadow and the reality of evil. At this dark point, which is common in the archetypal process, the psyche compensates with self-images, such as this one, as a way to reorganize the disparate parts of the personality into a whole. And now we have the divine child. Jung eating the sacrificial flesh and accepting both good and evil into his nature has resulted in the birth of the god Phanes, the Orphic figure of the Shining One, the firstborn, the father of Eros, god of beauty and light. He is Jung's god, reborn within him. He is the one who says, I give you the joy of suffering and the suffering of joy. This is the second of Jung's gods, reflecting positive characteristics. After even more torture, chaos, and shadow work, Abraxas, the Gnostic god of the frogs, was born in Jung as the union of God and the devil. The early man-eating phallus and the death worm were prefigurations of what would be incorporated into his God. Next we have Amor Triumphant. The inscription at the bottom reads, this image was completed on 9 January 1921, after it had waited incomplete for 9 months. It expresses I know not what kind of grief, a fourfold sacrifice. I could almost choose not to finish it. It is the inexorable wheel of the four functions, the essence of all living beings imbued with sacrifice. Related to this painting, in Black Book 7, he writes, I quote, what occurs between the lover and the beloved is the entire fullness of the Godhead. Both are unfathomable riddles to each other. For who understands the Godhead? But the God is born in solitude, from the secret, mystery of the individual. The separation between life and love is the contradiction between solitude and togetherness. End of quote. This painting seems so different from the others, so down to earth, full of real embodied suffering of reality, both spiritual and physical. And this is the last slide. And this is where I'm quoting Jung now, then she, the anima, appears in a church, taking the place of the altar, still over life size, but with veiled face. Jung states that a dream of his, I quote, restores the anima to the Christian church, not as an icon, but as the altar itself. The altar is the place of sacrifice and also the receptacle for consecrated relics. End of quote. This is the second image of the feminine in Jung's paintings, not including the feminine snake soul or dove. The first is blind Salome, the symbol of pleasure, who regains her sight through Jung's struggle. Now the feminine is elevated into the trinity, forming a quaternity, which is the living mandala in Jung's soul. In this painting, Jung begins to move back to the world of reality, into the church filled with masses of people, newly transformed by the addition of the feminine, clearly what was lacking for him and in the dogma of Christianity. It needed to be completed by the fourth missing element, the feminine. The Assumption of Maria was accepted into Catholic dogma in 1950. And that's the end of the slides. Now I just have a short conclusion. Jung was 38 when he began his exploration of the unconscious using active imagination. 17 years in the process, he spent the rest of his life deepening his understanding of what he experienced. He ended his work on this when he was 55 years old, the age when Neumann tragically died of kidney cancer. Neumann began analysis with Jung at 28, 3 years after Jung stopped working on the Red Book and shifted his attention to alchemy. Neumann was 31 years old when he undertook his journey into the depths. Although we have more information about Jung's journey, Neumann's is equally valuable for the clarity of his process in his paintings. Both painting sequences shed light on these two very different men and their individual struggles. I hope more will be uncovered about Neumann's process in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. That was fascinating to see the parallels of those two sets of paintings and to put them side by side. As you say, Neumann's paintings require a lot more scrutiny and study. A lot of details there that you refer to that one would want to really take on board and think about deeply. But it does definitely, his series shows a development, individuation process, movement, differentiation, synthesis. One question I have is, which is, you probably can't answer it, but maybe you can speculate on it. Why did Neumann stop in 1938? Or did he? Stop painting, stop his...
No, I don't believe he did, to tell you the truth, but I really can't answer that. It's quite an unknown to me. This sequence is from that period. I don't know. I just really can't answer that. I would guess he continued with his painting.
We just don't have them?
I don't know. Jung certainly, he did his painting in a certain time frame, and then of course we do know that he continued painting landscapes and carvings and everything else for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
I would imagine Erich Neumann did too, but I honestly can't answer that question. Maybe when we have Tamar Crone next month, we can ask her.
Yes, and maybe some of the things have been lost, as you say. Some were sold at auction. We don't really know what's there. I know Neumann was extremely taken with the topic of creativity. He wrote a lot about it in his Erich essays. And do you think these paintings and active imagination were his expression of creativity, or did that come out in other ways?
I would say that they were an expression of creativity. I mean, thinking about the absolutely beautiful little books that he created for his son and daughter, they were, I've seen them with beautiful watercolor paintings, and then he interpreted the stories for his children in those books. Named one of them. Very creative and lovely, and I think that he was extremely creative. His interest in art and literature, his early interest in Kafka.
Henry Moore.
And Henry Moore.
Chagall.
I just wanted to show, I can show you these little books that he made
Yes.
for his,
Lovely.
his kids. They're just very sweet with all the
Bright colors, very bright. Oh, look at that. Yes.
all the lovely watercolors, and these are just wonderful creative pieces for his children.
Mm.
And then,
Can I ask a question?
uh-huh.
One of the questions that came up from the audience was, you mentioned earlier that Jung was adamant about not describing his work as art, whether it be his painting or his sculpture, but saw it as a psychological process. We have a question wondering, first, what you might suppose is the reason that he was so adamant as to not categorize it that way, and can you comment on Neumann's feelings about it, who apparently continued doing art and did other creative pursuits for reasons even just for his children and things. Can you give some comment on that?
Sure. For Jung, he felt that by describing it as art, it would be a distraction from what he believed it truly was, which was a genuine emanation and presentation of those inner figures from his own psyche. And if he described it as art, it would take away from the real fact that the experience and the process of it was a giving birth of something of himself. It wasn't. It was personal to him, but it was also collective. But he didn't want it to be seen as art, as an aesthetic. He wanted it to be appreciated as a psychological emanation and process. And
Can I just make a comment about that?
Sure.
Jung had this tremendous need to understand. So I think the understanding overrode the artistic quality of his work. He had to understand it. Most artists don't care to understand it. They put it out there, they put it on the wall, they sell it or whatever, and somebody says, well, what does it mean? I don't know. I don't care what it means. They have no interest whatsoever in what it means. That was Jung's overriding interest. What does it mean?
With that question in mind, can I ask a follow-up of my own? Nancy, you commented that the increase in consciousness always comes at the expense of the unconscious. And insofar as the unconscious might be the wellspring of true creativity, and as Murray says, oftentimes the artist has little interest in understanding that. To what extent does the work of analysis that might bring unconscious material to conscious awareness sort of abort the process that Freud first spoke of as a sublimating process of impulses and images and content? Do you think there's a hazard there that the more we awaken, perhaps we rob ourselves of the wellspring of our creativity?
No, I don't believe so. I don't think that we could ever get down to the bottom of that well. Um,
I think you can dry up neurotic artistic efforts, if it's based on neurosis and conflict and it's a substitute for life or it's a defense or something, then yeah, it might take away the impulse to make things or pictures or whatever. But if it's truly creative, comes out of that wellspring that you're talking of, then I don't think understanding interferes with it. It could facilitate it, if anything.
We have another question, a very pedestrian sounding question, but I'm sure one that interests the whole audience. We've wondered if Neumann's paintings are published anywhere.
No, they're not.
No. Okay.
Are they going to be?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. We haven't really had that conversation. This is actually it's the third time that some of these paintings have been seen. We saw them at the conference in Tel Aviv, of course, for the very first time, and then at a Pacifica lecture, and now. I think it would be lovely if the entire sequence were published, but I think it would also be helpful to know more about them.
Are they contained in a book like the Red Book, or are they separate individual paintings?
Separate individual paintings that were quite chaotic and unorganized, and I asked Tamar Krohn and Raleigh Lowenthal Neumann if they would be so kind as to go through his journals to see if they could glean any kind of understanding of the sequencing of the paintings, because I knew that there had to be, there's always an important sequence in the paintings. I wanted to know what that was, and so they started that process. And what you saw was a small piece that they were able to pull out as being an actual sequence of paintings. And they haven't completed that whole process, so I don't know if there are paintings that come before what we saw. There are undoubtedly paintings that come after. I don't know how that all fits together. It's kind of like having a big box with all sorts of paintings in it and no idea what the sequence is. And you're just looking at these amazing paintings, but you don't know anything about them.
Right.
And the journals, of course, have a lot of information about them. So the more we're able to read in those journals and access the journals, the more we'll know about the paintings.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just announce to the online attendees that if you had raised your hand during the presentation, there were a handful of folks who did. We weren't sure when you did that, so Ryan has actually eliminated those. So if you have a question that you'd like to pose online, please feel free to click that button on the chat menu that shows your hand being raised, and we'll call upon you. Arel has a question, I think.
Erich, can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, thank you, both Murray, Len, and Nancy for your presentations and introductions. I'm glad to be with you. And I have a brief comment and a question. My comment pertains to the issue of can you analyze away creativity? I do think you can, and I think that's the difference between Freudian and Jungian analysis. If the intention with the analysis is to raise everything into consciousness and to achieve what you might believe is the complete sense of meaning or understanding of the symbolic, then you may well have drained something of the unconscious life of the symbol. On the other hand, if analysis is an approach stepping out of consciousness and not in order to possess the unconscious, but to carry out the dialogue halfway in between consciousness and the unconscious, then I think that there is a renewal, a constant renewal of the symbolic life. And then I think that analysis can be something that that gives further life to creativity. So that was an attempt at a brief comment about that question. And I have a question, and I would like to hear your thoughts. Maybe you know, I don't, maybe you know better than I do. As far as I know, neither Jung nor Neumann did any abstract paintings. I have not found many references either with either one of them about modern art. There is a comment by Jung in The Spirit in Man, Art and Literature. He writes, "It is only modern man who has succeeded in creating an art in reverse, a backside of art that makes no attempt to be ingratiating." And then he says, modern man is in the process of shaking off a world that has become obsolete. I assume that refers to the ideas or maybe the abstraction of modern art. And in Neumann's art, The Archetypal World of Henry Moore, he writes, modern art has a distinct tendency toward abstraction. A large part of this will for abstraction is unconscious and subserves the tendency to seek out and give shape to the primordial image, as opposed to the delusory phenomenal image. So both of them seem to relate the abstraction of modern art to a search away from the modern era, where modern particularly emphasizes that it's a search for the primordial images. I would like to hear if you know if any one of them painted, made any abstract paintings, and if there are further comments by either Jung or Neumann about abstract paintings in modern art, and your thoughts about it.
Well, I can start. Jung actually was very involved with the Dada movement in Switzerland when it began. And he knew all the early founders. They used to meet as a group in Zurich. And of course, that movement was all about deconstruction, taking apart. It was an early movement in modern art. And he left that group. He gave it up because he felt that they were going too far in their deconstruction, that it was a breaking down of the images, a breaking down of the symbols, and that it didn't allow for the symbols to reconfigure. And it's my understanding that he did not like modern art because of that very process. He felt that it was a ripping apart, but it wasn't a reconstruction. It wasn't aimed at bringing things back together to create the new symbols, the new images of wholeness. It left things in kind of in a shattered way, fragmented and shattered way. And so he really didn't like it. And I can imagine that that Neumann felt some of that too, in terms of modern art.
I think Christian Gaillard has written a number of essays. I'm getting a bad echo.
Hang on, I gotta turn off Nancy's.
Christian Gaillard was a professor at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris for many years, and he's a Jungian analyst. And in this book, there's an essay by him on Jung and Neumann's approach to art and their understanding of art. Very interesting, his take on it. And he argues that Jung actually appreciated modern art, that Jung looked at modern art, and he takes off from Jung's essay on Picasso, where he sees that Jung actually looked very carefully at Picasso's paintings and saw a process, an individuation process unfolding in them. And he said that if Picasso didn't go mad, that this would turn out to be an important moment in his midlife journey, the pictures that he was painting at that particular time in the 1930s, 20s and 30s. So I think it's quite complex. Jung's approach to art and modern art. The thing is, he didn't place himself within the art tradition. He saw himself as a thinker, as a healer, as a psychiatrist, if anything, an amateur painter. He was much more interested in understanding the symbols of the unconscious than he was in contributing to the development of art in the West. And so when he looked at art in the West, he saw a relationship between culture and art, that art anticipates culture in a way. If it becomes fragmented, it's looking at a fragmenting culture. It's like it's almost prognosticatory of where culture is going. So he almost looked at artists as kind of prophets, delving into the collective unconscious prior to when culture, collective culture gets there. So I think he gave a lot of credit to artists and tried to observe their works, again, from a psychological perspective, not art historical perspective. And on the point about that Erich made about the effect of analysis on art and art making, I think Erich made a very important point there, that if the analyst takes a reductive approach to art and art making, for instance, sees, as Nancy was reading that dream from Jung's childhood of the underground phallus, people would say, well, that represents a sexual trauma that Jung suffered in his childhood, and this man-eater, this phallus, was his abuser. There were some stories about Jung being abused as a child sexually. If you take the production and reduce it to childhood trauma, for example, or to basic sexual themes or power themes, whatever your preference is, that reduction can have a killing effect on creativity, as opposed to seeing the productions as symbolic, as representing the unconscious in a different way, not simply repeating past traumas, but perhaps working through them and going on and suggesting something for the future, a synthetic approach, let's say, to artwork rather than an analytic reductive approach. This would be the contrast between Freud and Jung on the point that Freud would reduce Leonardo's painting, for instance, to a mother problem. Jung would not do that. He would see the symbolic value in Leonardo's painting. The two mothers, for instance. We all have two mothers, he says. We have a literal mother and we have a symbolic mother. So I think the effect of analysis on artistic creation really depends a lot on the analyst. As Jung said, the right tools in the wrong hands can be very destructive. Mm-hmm. So it depends on who's doing analysis.
If you'll permit me, Murray, you know, it's interesting, a new frame for the essay that Freud wrote titled Analysis, Terminable and Interminable. If you look at it from a state of pathology, then it could be an interminable process that leads to no good result, but the way Erich and you are speaking of it, you would actually hope the process was interminable and an ongoing one.
Because individuation is interminable. Exactly. And you know, I've worked with some people for, I think, 20 or 30 years by now, and their process is continuing, and it's full of productive work, including artwork, active imagination.
I'd like to underscore what Murray said about that chapter in Turbulent Times, Creative Minds, that I thought it was particularly interesting the way the author of it in that chapter highlights that it was when Jung comes upon Ulysses and begins reading James Joyce's Ulysses that mm-hmm. it seemed as though he points to that moment when Jung's view of modern art begins to take a dramatic shift, and he no longer sort of disparages it, but begins to appreciate, perhaps as a result of the effect that Ulysses had on him, that there's something about that deconstruction that has more meaning. We have a question from Jens, and Jens, if you're still there, I'm going to unmute your microphone, and then if you'd like to pose your question.
Okay, thank you. I'm Jens Winterleff, a Danish Jungian graphologist working on the handwritings of Jung and Neumann, and moreover, I'm an analyst of children's drawings. And I have a question and a comment or question to Nancy, not about the drawings, but about the first dream of the 3 or 4 years old Jung, and you connected that to the, I think it was an active imagination of Neumann with the ape-man, the single-eyed ape-man. And surely these very deep fantasies or dreams points to the destiny of those men going very, very deep in the archetypal levels. But on the other hand, I got the impression from this very young Jung dream about his mother when his mother says, look at this phallus, this is a man-eater. Then I got the impression that maybe Jung, as living in a sort of a participation mystique with his mother's psyche, has perceived his mother's more or less conscious cultural critique of the masculine, you could call it Faustian world-conquering spirit, which is a sort of too much investigation and seeing and all that. So maybe this could be a sort of feminine, that he perceives his mother's feminine outlook. Have you comments to that?
Well, I suppose that's possible. He was very much connected with his mother, and he talks a lot about how his mother had two personalities. She had an outward personality, and then she had a kind of, to him, a very scary personality where she was kind of a psychic, spiritual things would happen around her, spirits, ghosts. She came alive at night, and he frequently was afraid of some of the emanations that he felt coming from his mother. So that she had that kind of scary side. And we also know that she was very sensitive psychologically. She was hospitalized for a period of time. So in other words, her psyche was very much alive and active in his world, and that scared him, and I'm sure it fascinated him too. And clearly in that field where a child is experiencing the mother in that way, the child is basically living within the matrix of the mother's complexes, the mother's psychology, and permeable to all of that. And I think he did struggle with that with both of his parents, actually, and a lot of his other early childhood experiences. He was a very, very sensitive child who picked up and wasn't deeply affected by the psychic realm around him. And I suppose it's possible, looking at it in hindsight, he certainly struggled with his father. I'm sure he struggled with his mother's animus also, which would be her masculine, and her attitude, fierce and otherwise, towards the masculine. But I also think that the image is so archetypal that it goes beyond the personal, especially for a child that young. He says he was 3 or 4 when he had that dream, which is really quite remarkable for a child that young to have a dream like that and to remember it so vividly. It obviously made a very big impression on him. And it really seemed to lay out his fate for his life, that he struggled with the issue of the God image and both sides of the God image, the positive side and the negative side, his entire life. And it was that God image was looking at him at a very early age.
Anila Yaffe wrote a very interesting article about that dream, and she said it announced Jung's creativity. That's a symbol of his creativity, that phallus. And Neumann writes on the dangers of creativity. The daimon can kill you, and Jung was very afraid of too much creativity. It can blow you out of the water. It drives you mad. It takes away your life. And so I think the mother's words are cautionary. Watch out for creativity. Watch out for too much creativity. It's a man-eater. That will kill you. Could have killed him. I think Jung somehow managed to contain his creativity with a lot of help, some people around him. Also, the Red Book was a container for his creativity. He could get it down on paper and in image, and so that it didn't just overwhelm him and override him. So I think it was an early cautionary warning about, this spirit that you've witnessed, as you say, Nancy, powerful, archetypal, huge force, and it scared him, as it should have. And his mother gives him an appropriate warning.
Nancy, we have one other question, and it reads as follows. You spoke about archetypal amplifying of these images as you opened that presentation. Question about commenting on the process of amplification in general and how it pertains to art that we create, dreams we cherish, or memories that we retain.
Well, amplification is an incredible process that helps you open up the understanding of images, whether they're from dreams, visions, paintings, whatever. It's a means of looking at the material, first of all, through a personal lens. What do each of those images in a dream, for example, mean to you? What experience do you have personally with each of those images? And then you take it one layer deeper than that, and you begin to explore where those images are found in, for example, mythology or fairy tales or comparative religion or in movies, books, whatever. And what is the context in which those images are expressed? What are the stories around those images? And the more information you can gather together through that process of looking at other sources to understand a given image, the more you will understand why your psyche gave you that image. Your psyche gives you images for very specific reasons. It wants to communicate something with you, and it only communicates in the form of metaphor and images. And so in order to better understand that form of communication, it helps to look at different metaphors around each image to try to expand your understanding of that image, to better understand why the psyche gave that to you, as opposed to a similar image which may have a completely different meaning.
I feel remiss that I didn't bring my copy in, but let me just mention it to the audience. Nancy and I think Erich co-authored and co-edited a volume that, if you're interested, I think you'd find very interesting and useful, titled, wasn't it The Dream and Its Amplification?
Yes. And that's what we talk about, amplifying dreams, the importance of amplification, what it means, and how to do it.
I find that a great resource, actually. Mary, have you any comments on that?
Well, I think what amplification does is put you in contact with the human race.
Thank you.
There it is. It puts you into contact with the rest of the human race. Jung said it helped break out of his isolation when he saw parallels in other cultures and so on, so that you don't feel that you're so idiosyncratic and so strange, because some dreams are weird, and if you can find an amplification for them, it tells you that other people have had this and it's been meaningful in other contexts. So it builds out, as Nancy said, it builds out the general meaning. You have to always bring it back to your life. Why are you having this dream? What does it mean for you in your own individuation process? But I think it helps you be a part of humanity to amplify. It's a good thing to do.
Well, that's it. That's all the questions that we have. I would like to actually make one comment and offer an apology to the audience. And Ann Lammers was kind enough to point out to me early on that I neglected to mention that we had people in attendance from the United States of America. But in my own defense, I'd like to say that perhaps that was my own unconscious compensation, since our president is constantly saying it's America first. Maybe I was just trying to make up for that. I apologize.
Just leaving it off. Yeah.
Let me just mention again that our next seminar in the series will be taking place on March 23rd, again at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, and that will be on Neumann, Religion, and the Numinous, and our guests will be Ann Lammers and Tamara Krohn. So I hope you'll be able to attend that as well. And for all the attendees, on their behalf, I just want to thank the two of you for your wonderful presentation. Thank you.